So Valerie, that's a lot of information in a short period of time. So thank you again. So let's go back in maybe 10 plus years ago. We're in the Gallup Organization. You guys do a lot of work in so many different sectors. Polling is only one area that the Gallup focuses on. But tell us how your organization decided to look at hope and engagement amongst other constructs to better understand what's going on in the world, and particularly in the lives of kids.
It's been such really a joyful journey and really a privilege for me to be able to come alongside some researchers and consultants in our organization to think about how do we really put some concreteness around measures that help us get at building students' involvement and their excitement about school and being able to connect the dots from that education experience really to their future. And how do we provide measures around that for schools that can kind of, again, complement some of those cognitive metrics and things that we measure. I appreciate you said that we all come with lots of hats. I come with a lot of hats today as a Gallup consultant and researcher, but also a school board member in my town here in Nebraska, as well as a mom of 4 kids. They all get to have all of their friends participate in my poll testing. They love that. Not really. They're like, Mom, another question you're testing? Yes. So I come with a lot of hats and around that and different lenses. And when I came to Gallup, it's been over a decade ago now, we had begun already internally thinking about a poll that we could provide metrics to schools around some non-cognitive things that are important, again, to help kids be excited about school today and ready for their future. So my good friend, the late Dr. Shane Lopez, was a senior scientist at the time and brought a tremendous amount of expertise out of the University of Kansas around hope science, and he helped architect that original survey where we measured students' engagement with school. Engagement we kind of describe simply as involvement as well as enthusiasm. Not just that I'm there every day, or even that I do additional activities or co-curriculars, which are also very important. I've written some stuff around that piece, but also how enthusiastic are you about it, that emotional component. And much of that engagement research wrapped into that original study and survey that is still there today, now more than a decade in, was really appropriated from our work in engagement globally in workplaces, understanding that how people feel about work really does impact outcomes and things like productivity, how safety and turnover, and that's true for grown-ups. And So we began to ask, well, how do we help to measure that for students, and how does that impact other outcomes? So we were asking those questions, and so engagement was a core component. And then the other piece of that study and survey was hope, which Shane was my good teacher about that for all of us, and I got to be the apprentice around hope science and how we think about it for schools. And um, you know, Shane in his book, Making Hope Happen, helped us know that hope is the belief that the future can be even better than the present, but also that we have the power to make that future happen, make it a reality. We kind of simplified that as we talked about it for schools as ideas and energy. Not only can you kind of think about the future and put together some concrete things and put words around that and kind of see it, envision it. You all have words about that too at Kids at Hope. But I can map a pathway to get there. And so we included in our school survey a measure about that. Generally, we would find in that, in our results, which we launched in 2008, and it was clear that it really resonated a lot measuring hope engagement. We also have well-being elements in our survey. Really resonated with schools and also some youth development nonprofit organizations that we were partnering with too, and continue to do so about that. But we realized people really wanted to be able to measure, but then of course be able to respond to what they see. And we would find in terms of hope, for example, that students tend to have pretty good ideas about the future. You know, for example, most think they're going to graduate, and in this country, we've made some good strides about that and inching up that marker of completing high school um, and even moving into that post-secondary. We've kind of creeped up. Bachelor's degree holders in the US are just over a third now. You know, so we've made some progress about those ideas about the future, for example, but Shane would help us know that sometimes it's that energy component. How do we leverage things that I know about myself, my own strengths, but also great resources outside of myself to move toward that positive future? And we did find not that all kids had great ideas, but many did, but that they really do need that help and support in navigating some of those obstacles, which are really common to every single person on the line about this too. So we launched that survey, gosh, 11 or 12 years. I admit I got a little, I'm forgetting exactly what year 2020 will represent, but
Yeah.
more than 6 million completes of our survey since that time. So it's been just a real pleasure to be able to partner with schools as they think about bringing these measures alongside other things that they need to keep track of.
What struck me when I first met Shane, and I met him when he was at the University of Kansas, and we had come from two different worlds. Mine, a world of practice, helping young people in the trenches find their way in life, and Shane as an academic and researcher studying the metrics of what it is that we know helps kids be successful in life, and then trying to find a way, which became our partnership, trying to connect research with practice and practice with research. And then when Shane moved on to the Gallup poll as senior scientist, and it struck me what he was trying to accomplish there with you, Valerie, and others. But it was astounding that in the history of American youth development, education, child welfare, behavioral health, we never really asked kids what they were thinking about in terms of their own lives. We knew a lot about kids in terms of how many take drugs, how many drop out of school, or what their grades are, what their standardized scores are, how many get arrested, how many are detained, how many consider suicide, how many suicide. I mean, we have a lot of information about kids, but we really weren't getting to the heart of what kids were thinking or feeling about their lives. And this was the first effort to, at a national scale, to really begin to understand what was in the hearts and minds of kids, not just what their behavior indicated to us. And I think that was quite a powerful movement in that direction. So you have 10 years of data now. Tell us what you're finding in terms of a sense of hope amongst America's children, grades 5 through 12, and a sense of engagement, and what you learned early on as you were exploring the whole concept of well-being amongst young people.
Yeah, I really like, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. It really was a goal of ours to provide positive metrics for schools that they could work toward. And all of those folks that have key touch points with kids to be able to aim toward that best, most unique and positive future for them and sort of give actionable. That word is sometimes a little overused, but it truly was our goal that the elements that we would measure would be things that people could truly already see alignment with what they were doing. We know that when we go in to partner with a new school, that they're thinking about building great culture for kids and for educators and all of those amazing staff members that are trying to make a great environment for learning and for work and for play. By the way, I love that we have an item in our survey. I have fun at school. We could do a whole
Mhm.
we could do a whole chat about that. It would be really fun. Um, but we know moving towards some of those positive metrics and helping folks have something to aim toward in the data from a data perspective and really act around was something that they were really hungry for. And again, we found resonated. We did a national survey of the US general population, but also we replicated this particular piece with superintendents of schools where we asked them to rate the level of importance of school effectiveness measures. So we give them several kinds of measures that many schools need to track, districts keep track of, including graduation rates, including standardized test scores, including attendance and some other things. And we also added in there engagement with school and hope for the future. And they independently rated each of those. And in our most recent report of the nation's superintendents, and we found this with the general population as well, we found nearly, or about 9 in 10 superintendents said that engagement, hope, and graduation rates were very important measures of effectiveness, very important, giving it that most extreme rating on that scale. And we found it was a little right around 1 in 10 said standardized test scores are very important. This was before our current context that we're all trying to navigate right now in our organization. So we knew that there was really a place, at least alongside a measurement framework, to measure engagement and hope and be really thinking well and thinking hard about how to do that. We found we're careful not to technically trend our data, a little methodology speak. Each year we run our Gallup Student Poll. Schools and districts opt to partner with us. So it is what we call a convenience sample rather than a probability-based one. So we're careful about that. We have done a couple of national polls too, but each year we have quite a lot. Last year we had maybe 300,000 students who completed our survey. We have found about, on our metric for engagement, about half of students are engaged. And one thing we've seen very consistently, Rick, since our first poll is that younger students tend to be more excited and enthusiastic about being at school than older students do. We ask the same 9 items, same with hope, the same questions of younger as older students. Hope's a little bit more stable through grade levels. As I mentioned earlier, we find in terms of our hope measure, that students have pretty good ideas. They're pretty sure they're going to graduate high school, for example, although I always help schools know, let's definitely pay attention to that smaller fraction of students who don't or just aren't sure they're going to graduate. Let's help them create those that vision for what it could be. But then, of course, always, as folks on this line know better than I, the things we need to do to come alongside and help them get there. But we do find that students have a little bit harder time strongly agreeing, for example, to I can find ways around problems. And one thing we found with that is that those problems are myriad that students are thinking about. I've had the chance to do interviews with students and kind of follow up with them, scorecards and metrics and means, and those of us who really love a good horizontal bar chart know that those data are great and that they provide a compass for us. Here's the direction maybe we need to go and help think about as a team, but you really you just really do need to sit down with kiddos and ask a little bit more. What were you thinking about when we asked the item, I feel safe at school? Some kids really think about the campus and little safety pieces about that, and others are thinking about maybe how I'm treated by my peers. So I love doing follow-up listening, and that's where also we learn even more about how we can come alongside and help.
Yeah, when you have a chance to look at the questions that Gallup does ask to determine a sense of hopefulness or engagement or well-being, it is pretty much a pretty good sample of ways that we talk about our sense of hope, our sense of engagement, or our sense of well-being. So the questions are very reliable in terms of their validity, that they really do get to the heart of what hope is. And back to what Valerie said earlier, in terms of the two separate constructs that make up hope are ideas and energy. A lot of people have ideas, but they don't have any energy. Other people have lots of energy, but they don't have ideas. So it's the combination of the two. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a few more moments, but I want to go back to the results of the Gallup poll, because what you said is really what has struck me. Over the 10 years that you've been surveying young people, grades 5 through 12, across the US, in your convenience sample, we understand that, that the whole idea of hope has been right around 50%, a few percentages over, maybe at one time, maybe a little bit lower, but it's been hovering around 50%. What does that tell us about America's students? Shouldn't hope be a much higher metric than just 50%? I mean, if you're not hopeful between the grades of 5 and 12 during your youthful years, where imagination and innocence and lots of ideas should strike you, it doesn't get easier as you get older to be hopeful, because some of the harsh realities of life set in. So what does it tell us about kids in schools that are just, we're hovering around 50% of those who respond to the survey, which is still a large number, indicating that hope may not be that compass in their lives that we hope it would, we trust it would be?
That's a really good question. So a little bit of context too about that. So that's pretty close. We found about 4 to 5 and 10 over the years of students in any given survey qualify as hopeful. So what we did was we did some sort of fancy analytics. I say that like I did. I say we like I'm included. I know some people at my good organization who are super fancy and helped us think about ways to take these items that are in our hope scale or in our hope survey, and developed a proprietary way that we qualify students as hopeful, stuck, and discouraged. And the value, I think, around that language is that, and believe it or not, we got stuck in that middle one that we ended up naming stuck, which is sort of funny. We thought, how do we talk about these students who sort of fall right here? We're a little stuck around that. So hopeful, stuck, and discouraged. And then that name, it really resonated. And we realized, gosh, there's really a lot of opportunity for those students who maybe don't fall in that hopeful category yet, but how can we help them get unstuck? And we really think like that around our engagement measure too, where we qualify respondents based upon their answers to the questions as engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. So you're right about that. On our proprietary metric, it was about 4 to 5 and 10 of students on any given year would fall in that hopeful category. I'm forever the hopeful consultant in that. I hope people know it's a tough bar. Our measurement about that and qualifying students is a pretty tough bar. So when we would follow up, we really want to help them know that, you know, if you concentrate on those individual elements that wrap up that hope scale and really move toward, hey, what would it take in our school or in our organization or with students that I'm partnering with in my after school activity or in my care right now? What would it take to get them to strongly agree about I have many goals? And that, which is one of our items. And how can we come alongside to drive that one element of hope? So even when we can think, gosh, 4 to 5 and 10 doesn't sound terribly hopeful just as a number, I always like to say, you know what, now we're thinking about it, and it's a pretty hard bar. in our hope metric. So let's back that up and let's think about individual elements that then we can together really plan about and do something around. And so in terms of I have many goals, about half of students strongly agree with that, and then half don't, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Actually, only about 1 in 10 students disagree with that. So that's just one area, for example, where we can kind of come alongside students. And if we didn't reach that one goal, how do we help them re-goal? How do we help them retool? But we have that guide now in our metric. What would it take for students here to be able to strongly agree? For those, and that's where I love that huddle up time with kids, when we can all find a way to do that, either virtually or in person, to do some more listening so that we can kind of break down that overarching metric and really think specifically about the things that could really support students in their journey toward their ideal, most perfect future for them.
Well, that becomes important because I know one of the questions that I think Shane and others have asked is to have people visualize a ladder with 10 rungs on it and think about the lowest rung being the worst life you can live and the highest rung being the best life you can live, and then visualize what rung you're on today and then what rung you'll be on in 3 to 5 years, and determine if you see yourself on a higher rung, you're probably a hopeful person. If you see yourself on a lower rung, you're probably discouraged. And if you see yourself on the same rung, you're probably stuck, right? The good news and what I hear you saying and what we understand about hope science is that hope is malleable. You don't have to be just stuck and you don't have to be discouraged, that you can do something about it. I can't do much about my height. I can't do much about my eye color, right? But I can do much about my hope, right? And so we want to talk about some of the practices that schools, and when we think of schools, I always think of schools, I think of students in the school. And then I realize that those students sometimes are in the juvenile justice system. Sometimes those students are in the child welfare system. Sometimes they're in the behavioral health system, in community-based organizations. So I think in terms of the student, that sense of hopefulness follows them regardless of what sector is serving them. But back to my premise, meaning that what Gallup is finding in the education system and measuring kids' student sense of hopefulness and engagement really is applicable to all the other sectors that serve young people. And all the other sectors are designed to help kids succeed in life. And then the question is, if some kids aren't succeeding, does that mean the institutions aren't helping them? And what's the first thing that institutions can do? And amongst other things that we all try to find those priorities, one of the things that we can do is help kids become hopeful, because that seems to be the metric that allows other things to be positive in their lives. That's a long ways around, which I'm good at doing, but it's a long ways around back to the original question, is understanding that hope is malleable, can be taught and learned. How do we do that? How do we teach hope to children who may be stuck or discouraged?
Well, first, I think everyone on chat, you can give Rick a great out loud clap about your summary on what we like to call evaluative well-being, where you described that ladder and how we can measure well-being. Gallup thinks about well-being as sort of experiences, things we experience, maybe feelings such as happiness or loneliness or sadness. And also that reflective piece, or that evaluative well-being. How can I report away how things are going today and in the future? And you just described that, which is the Cantrell scale for any folks out there that might be interested in looking that up. You did a really nice job in describing that. And I think when we, on the upside, by the way, about that, we have found that young people tend to be a bit more optimistic about what rung of the ladder that they tend to be on. So we're already starting maybe in a little bit better place with those resilient kiddos, where they kind of tend to reflect on their lives, maybe even a little bit better than some of us grown-ups do in the data that we have seen historically. So I appreciate that you led your good chat around that. You did a very nice job. I happen to be listening to one of our senior scientists talk about that as we're tracking evaluative well-being right now and through the current crisis. So appreciate that. And as we think about how we do help students experience great days today, and I know so many remarkable people who are trying new and innovative ways to stay connected with kiddos to do that. And we talk around here about creating hope, and we kind of use that word, and splashing off hope on others. It is something that we see in hope as well as in engagement, that it can splash off on the folks around us. Now we kind of think really creatively about the ways to do that. I think what I love is there really are ways that we can do that even remotely, where many of us are relating, how the ways that many of us are relating right now. We had a really hopeful thing happen at work about that really recently. One of my favorite books is How Full Is Your Bucket? At Gallup, we have some things that we publish that you might be familiar with out there, friends. How Full Is Your Bucket is one of those leadership books, but we also have one for kiddos, and it's called How Full Is Your Bucket for Kids. And a hopeful thing that happened to us in terms of creating hope, and that really was sort of the goal of this chat, was to have a How Full Is Your Bucket for Kids book given to each student in the district. And this is local. It's in a Midwest. I'll leave it open to that. It's a district, pretty big district in the Midwest region. And a wonderful foundation kind of came along and said, you know, we need to try to literally create some hope. That was the kind of the goal. And the reason I loved that, and when I think about ways that we can create hope, is it really speaks to how can you fill someone else's bucket. Really tough to do when things feel bad, and it absolutely does feel bad for many families right now. And I think we just can be real honest and clear about that. But I love that there is an opportunity that we have to be real intentional about spotting those things that are amazing in someone else. And some of you may be familiar with our strengths work and identifying people's talent. And I think How Full Is Your Bucket is just one way where I can spot a talent in someone else and something they do really well. We found, again, for grownups that tends to be a great way to help people drive performance in their work. And it's also pretty effective for young people to give them words about, here is what I see in you. And you all know this, you treasure hunters out there, about what is special and unique. And our work in strengths just gives really a great language around that, but not just a language, but a way to practice it. So I think right now, as we think about, we know, and organizations around the globe, we're thinking about development right now of people. When we know that this is a really challenging time, let's not wait till the crisis is over before we start investing in ourselves and one another and making what we do best even better. So I would say, as a number one hope creator, is learn more about what you do really well right now, invest in that, and splash it off on someone else. Use that toward the well-being, not only of yourself, start there, but for sure towards someone else. And young people can do that too. And they may just need a grown-up to help find that treasure in them, that unique talent and strength, and put words around it and spot it in action. I see that you do an amazing job making friends. Maybe there's that one friend that doesn't have a lot of Zoom calls with friends in a week that you can schedule a quick Zoom call with to say hello and check up. You're really good at that. You're great at making friends. You know, those pieces, I think, around what we do best, spotting them in one another, and getting really good and intentional about not only spotting it, but finding ways to develop it, even while we're all a little bit quarantined. Find creative ways to do that. I think is, if I were just to pick one right now, let's lead with that one. Spot what's amazing in someone else, fill their bucket by noticing it, calling it out, and help them get better at it.
I like the metaphor of splashing hope, and what one of the constructs or concepts that we promote is you can't have a kid at hope until you first have an adult at hope. So that adult has to be a hopeful person, and which means, do they have ideas and energy, and can they share those ideas and energy and encourage kids to find their own ideas and energy? And that becomes the relationship side of it. I love the idea of engagement too, because as I dig deep into what Gallup is trying to understand, is that engagement seems to have a strong relationship to being connected at school. There's people there that are my friends, that they care about me, that they allow me to do things that I'm good at. It's that sense of engagement seems to be that sense of connectedness or that sense of belonging, and that sense of hopefulness seems again to be my ability to articulate something where I can make the world, my life better tomorrow than it can be today. And that comes because I have ideas and energy. And then that gets wrapped around is that hope isn't static, it's malleable, it's dynamic, and it becomes a great ally. Uh, um, so let's go to some Q&A now, because I think you seeded a lot of good thoughts, keeping in mind our audience is diverse from education to juvenile justice to child welfare to community-based organizations. So you may get questions that are specific to that sector or that professional within that sector. So Kim, we're going to take the next 20 minutes and allow you to moderate a Q&A for us, if you would be so kind to do that. Thank you, Valerie.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Valerie again, and Rick, and everybody around the country and maybe the world. I don't know if we have any international folks joining us today, but it's always fun to see all of you and where you're from. So if you do have questions, throw them over in the Q&A box, not the chat box, because those go away really quickly and I don't have time to grab them, but the Q&A box, we'll get to as many as we can today. So Kathleen is asking you, Valerie, when Dr. Calderon engages with school partners at the high school level, does she ever use the Gallup Clifton Strengths for students to help them find and build on strengths to help develop/cultivate hope and make their futures happen?
Thank you for that great question. Yes, is the short answer about that. So I spoke to talent and strengths. We do, I may not have been, I don't know that I mentioned that really well, that we have an assessment that helps grown-ups, but students as well, to know what those are. In fact, I just had my youngest student, who is a freshman in high school. We have an assessment for younger students called Youth Strengths Explorer, appropriate for sort of preteens, maybe 5th grade up to about 8th. And then for adults, starting at about 9th grade or so, we would recommend taking the Clifton Strengths. My daughter just actually, I had her take it. She's like, how long is this going to take? I said, it's just 35 minutes. It's good. So I was able to nudge her that way. I love that. It basically becomes one of your ways. So when you can identify talent and spot that in someone else, our research has shown that that is one of the most effective ways to build someone's performance, their ways to achieve goals. Even organizationally, we've done meta-analyses across organizations that do strengths-based development rather than deficit fixing kinds of ways. Not to say that we can't address weaknesses, and we certainly have ways that we think about that. But when you're beginning with strengths, for example, it's really hard for a student to be disengaged with school if they can tell us, for example, that the school is committed to building the strengths of each person. Really, really hard to find a disengaged person in a workplace who says, my organization is committed to building the strengths of each employee or each associate, for example. So yes, we do use Clifton Strengths for students, and that has some wonderful content that's specific to students. It is the kind of adult assessment about that, and I loved seeing that those top 5 strengths float up in the report for my daughter, and things that I've known about her honestly since she was an itty bitty. I could see words and language around it. For example, woo is her number 1, winning others over. She's a wonderful influencer in the very best ways, and a developer. Even when she was itty, knew she wanted to be an educator. It's almost one of her first words, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. She's a developer at heart. She loves to see other people do really well and kind of come alongside and help them. It's just kind of how she's wired up. But we've been really fortunate to come alongside with educators who have helped her practice that already, even as a young kid, where she got to be a helper for her partner, for her friend in her classroom who had special needs, for example. And educators have come alongside to help develop that in her. So it's a wonderful tool. It's one way to help us put some language around that. So thanks for asking about that.
I just want to piggyback just for a second on that and say, if you focus on deficits, you automatically put kids in a liability column. And if you focus on assets, you automatically put them in an asset column. And I think it's just part of the human nature that we treat deficits and treat assets differently. And if you can find the assets in the kid, the strengths in the young person, and build upon those, it seems to take care of a lot of the deficits or they even become more aware and they take care of it themselves. But if the focus could be one or the other, and sometimes we don't have all the time in the world to focus on both things, it seems to me that people who are successful in life seem to be those where their strengths have been identified and have been maximized to help them navigate those difficulties. So Kim, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you. I had a couple people asking specifically about getting access to the Gallup Student Poll. What is the accessibility free for schools, and if they can get copies of the study with the results?
There is a fee about that to participate, and I'd be delighted to help you know that. I have some good colleagues that can follow up with good information for you. So very, very glad to help you have that information, Kim, or you're glad to, my email, you're glad to send them my way, and I'll make sure they get connected to the right folks. Absolutely.
Thanks. So Judith is asking, in your HOPE research, I wonder how much emphasis and importance is placed on a child's physical health, especially good nutrition and exercise. Is there any studies around that?
I really love the question, and I didn't have a chance to chat about this, but I thought about it as Rick was describing one of our well-being scales that we do. So I've done more about that question in terms of some of those physical elements in my higher ed partnerships and work than we have in K-12. So, but we do know from that work that they're certainly very relevant and important. We have a book called Well-Being, and we think about well-being experiences in 5 different elements: career, career well-being, physical well-being, of course, which certainly is very paramount in everyone's mind, but there are also others that are interdependent and related, but still unique. So career, physical well-being, social well-being, community well-being, and financial well-being. And it's interesting the play across those elements in our research and how important they are to one another, though distinct. And so I have no doubt that well, we don't measure those specific 5 elements for K-12. Our research certainly underscores the importance. I've been involved in a couple of higher ed contexts where we looked at some elements, as you described, of stress, sleep, movement, and such. And it was remarkable to me how truly interdependent some of those aspects were, so that you could not just have higher physical well-being reported, but be higher on those other elements if you were doing some of those behaviors well, had lower stress or had more sleep, for example, and ate better foods, for example. So it was remarkable to me that it mattered not only around that physical well-being piece, but some of those other elements as well. So we do know, to that good question, that those are pretty critical, and appreciate the really good question. It's definitely something we've seen in our other worlds of research.
Thanks, Valerie. I've had this question sent to me in a few different ways via email. So if this is the same people that have been emailing me asking about this, sorry if we haven't gotten back to you. So I'll just throw it out to you. And this might be a lot for you, Rick Miller, as well. They're asking about adults at Hope. They're developing graduation and independence programs for foster kids in the community. They are looking for something to help foster kids who are aging out of foster care in their 20s to achieve success. So what can we do for them? Well,
there's that combination of making sure that they have a strong support system around them, right? That if they age out, doesn't mean they age out of relationships. They have a certain level of independence, which is a kind of an official status, but we never age out of the need for people to believe in us. We never age out of the need for people to connect with us, and we never age out of ideas and energy that we need to help navigate our futures. We call that mental time travel. So it's ensuring that those robust conversations between adults and kids continue to exist. I remember training juvenile court prosecutors and them questioning why they're at a kids at home training, because they're prosecutors and they're dealing with some hard, cold facts about kids' behaviors and their choices. And their county attorney felt that it was important for them to learn about Kids of Hope and use that framework to help them in their prosecutorial activities. So I attended a lot of court hearings, a lot of juvenile court proceedings, and then would debrief with the prosecutors afterwards. And they had to focus on the law for these young people, and they had to understand the consequences and what the law offers them in terms of options and considering their particular offense. But at the end, I said, as long as the kid knows that they're still in a system, a caring system, or whether you're a prosecutor or a defense attorney, a juvenile court judge, a probation officer, detention officer, a school custodian, a teacher, a social worker, it doesn't matter your job. Does the kid know that you believe in them? Does the kid know that you have their backs? That, yeah, they're going to be held accountable for their actions, but they have you to have their backs to help guide them in life. And are you talking about ideas and energy, the mental time travel side of things? So those are the things you don't age out of. Now, the question becomes more consequential when you have to be able to ask that question about yourself. Do I have people in my life that believe in me? Do I have people in my life that I can connect to, that I have that support system? And do I have my own ideas and energy? That becomes the adult at hope. So you can't teach that which you don't know. If you're not a hopeful person, how do you teach a child about ideas and energy and mental time travel and relationships if you yourself aren't experiencing that? So we kind of have to have that personal assessment or inventory in our own lives, and then gravitate to a life where we find people that we can share our ideas, our energy, our relationships, and then we're more capable of helping young people navigate those difficult times in their life. I wish I could say I have a short answer for some of this, but I don't.
Thank you.
They come with long answers.
I have a couple people, Catherine and Barbara specifically, asking about hope in preschoolers. What's the youngest age you can test hope in kids? Are there ethics requirements easier than things like mental health diagnostics?
That's something I really I don't know the answer to that. I've had the privilege of partnering with some remarkable early care and education experts in the state of Nebraska, actually, at the University of Nebraska, who are just doing a wonderful job. The Buffett Early Childhood Institute here at the University of Nebraska in our state, we did some work with them a little bit ago, and when they first became an institute, not all that long ago, several years ago, but really they're just doing a wonderful job investing in studying, researching, issues around the early care and education workforce and such in our state. And gosh, they taught us an awful lot about children and brain development, and how those early years matter so very much. So we learned a lot from them. To the good question about assessment specifically, I don't have a way to do that. I do know, I kind of mentioned this earlier, that we have pretty robust thinking, I guess, around kind of what I maybe alluded to earlier around strength spotting, even in littles. I had mentioned my daughter and her sort of talent about developing. And that actually, when my daughter was in the Donald O. Clifton Child Development Center, which is, we were very privileged to have our early care and education center here at Gallup, and I remember one of her teachers telling me one day, hey, we temporarily misplaced Ella, and she had been outside and didn't come in with the kids, and so she was on the playground, she's good, but she had all the little babies sitting on the other side of the fence in the little toddler yard, and she was three or four, and she was on her side of the yard, and she had been teaching the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm with animal sounds to the littles. So she was just a little kiddo when those teachers who had done a really remarkable job of just spotting talent, even in young people. So in terms of measuring what that looks like for the littlest, well, I can't speak to that in terms of hope. I do find it a really interesting and fascinating question, and I'm glad you asked it.
I think it becomes even more fascinating because most of the instruments that measure hope are, designed for grades 8 or ages 8 and up, or grades 5 and up. So again, understanding the question and then being able to respond to it is a higher cognitive function. But what we understand, I think, in terms of early development of hope, I have drawn from kind of the neurodevelopment of young people. And one thing that struck me in some of my readings was that the hippocampus, which kind of monitors or manages memories for us, matures at about the age of 3, or begins to mature about the age of 3, which is why most of us have a difficult time remember things before the age of 3, but we have an easier time when people ask us what's our earliest memory. It usually gravitates to about age 3. But if we can begin to remember, which is a key part of mental time travel. So mental time travel happens in 2 directions. One is remembering what's happened in the past, and then using that information to understand what can happen in the future. Sometimes that's good, and then sometimes that's bad. But that process, the way the hippocampus manages a memory and then uses it to do some future casting, which we would call, ideas and energy for the future, is when a child's able, and you begin to see this at around age 3, begin to say words like, when I grow up, I'm going to go to work like my mom and daddy, right? When I grow up, I'm going to be, an ice cream truck driver. When they begin to have those conversations, then you can begin to hear those ideas and come to the forefront. And that's what you want to begin to nurture, not just in terms of a career, but in terms of, when I grow up, I'm going to have a wonderful family. When I grow up, I'm going to give back to my community. When I grow up, I'm going to explore the world. That's where you want kids' neural networks to begin to sprout out and create those pathways to begin to think multidimensionally about their future. And that begins to happen at age 3, when the hippocampus matures, and we can begin to nurture that. So there's a lot happening in the brain between 0 and 5, and those are remarkable windows to take advantage of.
And our survey, our Gallup Student Poll survey, is for students who are in grades 5 through 12. We feel really comfortable with the cognitive testing we've done with students of that age. I do think it could be okay for younger students, candidly, but that is the grade level we feel pretty comfortable fielding in our survey with. I know that Making Hope Happen, that book, there is a children's hope scale there. I'm not sure what the recommendation about that is, but did want to just make mention about those couple of things for you.
Yeah, I think it goes to about age 8. I know we use some of that when we do assessments with schools. We offer the Children's Hope Scale that's fairly easy to administer and fairly easy to report on. We use what we call our culture scan. What is it that your organization believes in, and what is it practice? Because sometimes we believe in things we don't practice, and sometimes we practice things that we don't believe in. We believe a culture is defined as what it believes and what it practices in relationship to those beliefs. So those are 2 assessments that we use when we work with the school or organization or community in rooting and anchoring kids of hope as part of their cultural framework. Kim, I'm going to toss it back to you, babe.
Thank you.
And
you might have.
I have to say babe because she's also my daughter, so I apologize every so often when that slips out. I'm not being rude or anything else, but Kim also is my daughter, and every so often that babe pops out, so I apologize for that.
You're forgiven today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think you touched on that a little bit, talking about the Children's Hope Scale and stuff, but people are asking about the tools that you mentioned. I don't know if there was other tools that you might have mentioned, Valerie, to focus on strengths in youth justice and the availability of those and how they get their hands on them.
Yeah, for sure. So we do have a strengths assessment for younger children that is really, I would give that about grade 5 through 8 with a little ish on the end. I think I may have had mine kiddos take that assessment when they were younger a little sooner, and that's the Strengths Explorer, and it's a little simpler in terms of the report on that talent assessment. It is done online, so you do need to have a Wi-Fi connection. And then we really find about 9th grade and older to take the adult Clifton Strengths talent assessment. And We have, gosh, millions of folks around the globe, from young people through chief executives of some of the world's largest organizations that leverage strength-based development. So glad to help with more information if anyone is interested about that. But about ninth grade is appropriate to take the grown-up assessment, if you will, Clifton Strengths.
I would amplify, underscore that a million different ways. And one way is I would make sure that my children, and they did, have a dental visit, have a physician visit once a year. There are certain things in terms of knowing their sense of well-being, physically and mentally, socially, emotionally, hopefully. And I think one of those assessments that every kid should have offered to them is the Clifton Strength Finder assessment. Kids need that information about themselves, and often it's missing. In schools, we're going to measure their achievement. Are they doing well? May get an A or B. Are they doing okay? May get a C. Are they struggling? Getting a D or an F. So we're measuring achievement. This doesn't measure achievement, it measures your strengths. And everyone should have a good sense of what their strengths are. It's just an important part of that overall self-image and self-esteem. So let's not lose sight of it. It should fall within the physical visit and a dental visit each year. We should have a sense of that.
Yeah, we have some amazing coaches, and I think about my early days and how valuable they were helping me think about the ways that I use my strengths to get work done. And if I think, gosh, if we could speak that into young people, that I spot this in you, and you're going to be even better at it as you go through your journey in life, and whatever pathway, whatever way we try to take to our future, there are going to be stumbling blocks, some that maybe we can anticipate, but a lot of things, our present circumstances come to mind. We really can't dream up. We can't always know, but we can know that I can create hope toward my future. I can make steps toward that, leaning on some internal resources that I've had because I've used that strength before to get around some obstacle, to help create a better future, to achieve a goal, to help someone else achieve a goal. And knowing that you have words and helping young people have those words maybe even sooner, and that self-awareness about that, so that they can do it really on purpose and be super intentional about moving toward what the best future is that I can picture for myself and the people that I love around me, even better, and all the more needed even right now. Is this is one of those circumstances that no one maybe there are some folks who sort of could have imagined this, but many can't. So, but now we know this is something about me that I can lean into, and people have noticed. It's even better if someone notices and speaks good words about those strengths, but I can use this to navigate and manage toward the next step, whatever that might be.
So Kim, I'm
Yes.
sure there's one last question that you can identify for us, and we'll toss that to Valerie first, and then I'll wrap our Hope Forum up for today. So
Okay,
what
actually,
made that question?
let me address a couple, because people are asking some kind of logistical questions, and there's quite a few of them. So I'm going to throw those out real quick, and then I'll throw one more question at you guys. One, all the Hope forums can be found on our YouTube page. So just search Kids at Hope on YouTube. If you have specific questions for us, or you're interested in Kids at Hope, or connecting with Valerie or Gallup Student Poll, email kim@kidsathope.org. You will get a follow-up email to this forum, and that includes a certificate and a link to the recording. And please add yourself to the mailing list if you want future future reminders of the forums coming up. Thank you. So a couple of people asked Valerie specifically about the areas of well-being. Can you please talk about those again?
Sure. So thank you for that. I don't have a specific website right off the top of my head, but just search for Gallup Wellbeing, and some of that will pull up from our website, because I know you'll find a lot of good resources around that. But we do think about well-being in a couple of different ways: how we experience it and how we evaluate it. The 5 elements that we do have measures around, and these we have used in higher education specifically, but in all kinds of contexts, and businesses around the world. So around career well-being, social well-being, physical, financial, and I usually can come up with 4 off the top of my head. I actually think I got all 5 before. But we think about it in those different dimensions and those elements, both interdependent but certainly related around with each other. So glad you can actually Google that book, Gallup Wellbeing, pull that up. Another book that I really love around well-being topics is by Tom Rath, called Eat, Move, Sleep. Also one of my, just a really terrifically well researched book, if that is a space that you're interested in. So those 2 are good, and glad to help steer more if I can be helpful.
So I know when we host these whole forums that an hour isn't enough time, particularly when you have a guest like Valerie
I had so many more stories.
I know you do, and
hope stories are the best.
I want to engage you, and I want to honor people's time, but we will have you back. You know, we invite Valerie to our Masters Institute, to our Mini Masters Institute. She was part of the launch of the Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope at ASU when we launched that a couple of years ago. So she's part of our family. If you need to reach Valerie, you can reach her through us. You can reach her directly. Gallup is more than a polling organization. I think you learned that today. So many resources and so many opportunities to grow through their organization. I have one quick announcement for all of you. On May 21st, we're hosting our first 3-hour workshop called Inspiring and Empowering Hope Through Strengths-Based Strategies with Charlie Appelstein, who's considered one of the top youth trainers in the country, particularly with kids with social, emotional, cognitive challenges. So we're going to share the platform with Charlie. It's going to be a 3-hour workshop of a great engagement. And then there are going to be 2 bonus webinars following that in the subsequent weeks, so we can dig even deeper into it. So a 3-hour workshop followed by 2 1-hour webinars. If you need more information about signing up for that particular event, contact him. There's a small itsy bitsy registration fee. If you have trouble with that registration fee, you know Kids at Hope will do whatever we can to make sure no one's denied our services and the experiences that we offer. So again, from Kids at Hope, ASU, the Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope, Valerie Calderon, Kim Heredia, thank you for joining us again. We look forward to you coming back next week when we have Spencer Gorin from the University of Arizona talking about relationships. And so we're going to continue these Hope forums as we make it through these very difficult, challenging times. Godspeed to all of you. Fasten your seatbelts. You're traveling at the speed of hope.